Hello, my name is Robert. I'm his oldest grandson, and probably because I'm one of the most talkative members of the family, I've been asked to sort of say a few words about Ivan today. I remember when I was young, my ability to talk probably wasn't too appreciated for a man of his generation, where children were to be seen but not heard. But I was definitely a child who was there to be heard, and I did talk a lot to him, and I asked incessant questions, and he'd always replied. Sometimes when I asked too many questions, I'd ask him what he was doing or what he was making, and he'd tell me that he was making a wigwam for a goose's bridle. And I knew at that point it was time to let it go and do something else. My father left when I was 5, and I have no real memories of him at all. And in a lot of ways, until probably the age of 11 when we moved and went to Whakatane, he was my father, and he was the largest male figure in my life. And I think, I'll always look at him as being my father, because I have no real memories of my real father. We used to do things together occasionally. We'd go fishing, and I remember as a child, we'd get up at ludicrously early hours of the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I remember him making porridge and sitting there and eating the porridge with him, and we'd go fishing, and I would just talk the whole time he was fishing. He'd sit there and listen to me, I suppose. And that's just a good thing to do with children, you know. He was a progressive man, and a man who never, not that I ever witnessed, ever used violence to get what he wanted. I remember one time he hit me. He went pop like that, and that was the only time he ever hit me in my entire life. And I wasn't a bad child, but I certainly was stupid, and I did lots of dumb things. He was a breeder of birds, and one day he had a bird, a budgie that meant a lot to him, and it died. And he put the bird into a jar of formaldehyde to keep it and to show it to people what a prize bird should look like. And I came across it one day, and I remember looking at it, and being a child I couldn't help myself, and before I knew it, I'd shaken this jar so much that the bird had disintegrated and was a pile of it was a jar of birds and feathers. And I remember him being upset and angry with me, but he never struck me, and I'm sure there would have been so many people who would have, but he didn't. But he was a man who was able to impress upon to me that I had done wrong, and he did it in such a way that I still remember it to this day, but he never resorted to hitting me. And I remembered what he said, and I think maybe if he had have hit me, I would have forgotten it and just done the next stupid thing, but he was that kind of a guy. I remember one day I was on school vacation, and he took me out on his rounds as a Hydatis ranger. And I don't really remember a lot of it. I would have been probably 7, 8 or 9, but I just remember the repetitious nature in which he greeted people when he met them. It was always, "Hey, how are you?" And the hand would go forward, and it'd shake vigorously, and the farmer and him would lean against something and look in the same direction as people of the land do, and nod at each other, and they would talk about things. And it seemed to take hours to just dose a single dog, and we'd go somewhere, and the whole process would be repeated all over again. He used to tell a story to everyone that I'd ever bring along with me of the time when as a child of about 5, I'd ridden a bicycle that I'd been given by him and my grandmother into the side of an aviary, and I had damaged the wire and opened it up, and it was only by quick actions that he'd prevented birds escaping through the hole which I'd made with my bicycle. And I remember the last time he told someone that story, he got halfway through it, and he lost concentration and didn't finish the story. And part of me was so relieved that I didn't have to relive me crashing into the aviary. But at the same time, there was like a feeling of sadness that something had changed and things would never be the same again. And I suppose that's when I knew that the end for him was close. He was a man who he was a man of old values, is what I'd describe. He wasn't arrogant, opinionated, aggressive, loud, or flashy. He just was a solid individual, a man of his generation, really. He knew so many people. Going to town with him and my grandmother was so incredibly painful that we would never get anywhere before eventually he'd meet someone he hadn't seen for years, and they would go through a conversation that would go for a huge period of time, and then we'd move forward a short period and the whole process would start again. and it would just keep going. And I'm sure if he had have died maybe 20 or 30 years ago, there would be a huge number of people here. But in some ways, he outlived a lot of the people he knew, and that was him. He was a man of the land, I suppose, and he had so many parts of his life: the dog side, the birds. There were pigeons at one point. A man of so many different jobs in his life. And sometimes I look at him and I think about what are the similarities between me and him, and there are a lot of differences. A lot of differences between the two of us, but there are some things, those core values that I try to hang on to. He was a man whose prime motivation to me was that he wanted to be loved. Some men are motivated by power, some by greed, and some by lust, but I never ever witnessed or heard any stories of my grandfather sacrificing the love of the people he knew to gain either of those things. And if there was one thing that I got from him, I'd like that to be one thing that I carry with me, is that I hope to maintain the love and not sacrifice it just for some of the other things, some of the other values that people hold. I'm a man who likes to have items and bits and pieces from people that I've met over the years, and on the cover of the bit of paper that you've been given, there's a picture of him, and he's wearing a blue and white shirt, and I've got that shirt at home. It's one of the little things that I've got off him, and every time I put it on, it reminds me of him. It looks like a tea towel, and I always dry my hands on it when they're wet. It just feels so natural. But I'd just like to say just a quick poem that sort of was in keeping with that I saw today, and I thought it reminded me of a little bit about the things you keep. I've also got a sawhorse of his as well, but it's so decrepit that it can barely maintain its own weight, and I do have all the bits if I want to put it back together again. So this is a poem by Graham Lay. It's called Frank's Axe. A few years after you died, Frank, I borrowed your axe. I needed to chop firewood, and the axe was inside your back door with your scythe and shopping trundler. Years passed and I kept your axe, Frank. I like the smoothness of its hickory handle and the way its blade bit deep. A couple of blows and the round would split into neatly burnable triangular chunks. I've often thought while chopping wood, this axe of yours, Frank, I must take it back to 14 Esmone Road, Takapuna, where your scythe and shopping trundler still wait inside the back door, keeping each other company. But I hold on to your axe, Frank. I can't bring myself to take it back because of the way its blade bites deep, hard and clean and straight. This instrument of a working man reminds me so much of you and your work. Thank you very much.